Hi there. I wanted to explain a thing or two about persecution. For those of you who watched my video, Which Christ Are You Preaching? You know that I had some views on persecution. I explained that we're persecuted when we preach Christ as he's presented in the New Testament. If we preach Christ as he's foretold in the Old Testament, what's said about him in the Gospels, what's preached about him in the epistles, and what's said about him in Revelation, etc. If you preach the fullness of Christ, then you'll be persecuted. Now that includes the righteous judge side. Too often people want to preach the nice soft side of Christ without the harsh reality of the fact that he's the righteous judge and he will judge all in the end. The Christ that says there's a narrow way and few there be that find it. The Christ that says broad and easy is the way that leads to destruction and many there be that find it. Okay, people don't want to hear that. If you preach that, you'll find out about persecution. So, what do I want to clarify? Well, being persecuted for preaching the fullness of Christ, there's a good chance you are a Christian, you're saved. But we mustn't misunderstand. To be persecuted doesn't equal salvation. You can be persecuted for reasons other than preaching the fullness of Christ. For example, if you went to Tibet and you spoke to some of the monks there, I'm sure you would hear some horrific stories about persecution, even unto death. You would hear how they're persecuted by the Chinese government, how many of them have died. But these people haven't accepted Christ. They're not being persecuted for Christ's namesake. Christ said in the Sermon on the Mount, if you're persecuted for my namesake, rejoice, because there's great reward awaiting you. You're going to be blessed for that. But if you're persecuted for some other reason, there's nothing to do with Christ. If you're persecuted and you're somebody who denies who Christ is, then you're not saved. Another example, you remember David Koresh of Waco? He started the Branch Davidian. He reckoned he was God. He reckoned he was the Christ. And they all went down in flames, him and many of his followers. So some might say they're persecuted for what they believe. But they didn't accept the true Christ. They didn't preach the true Christ. So they were persecuted for other reasons. And they won't get a reward for that. If you go to India, you'll find Hindus who die for what they believe in. If you look at Islam, Muslims, many of them are more than willing to give their life for what they believe. But they didn't accept Christ as a Saviour. They are not being persecuted for Christ's namesake. They're not preaching the fullness of Christ. So, yeah. I would also like to extend that to Mormons. See, Mormons are often challenged and corrected by true believers. I reckon they will be persecuted by other people, atheists, etc. But quite often they're merely questioned and challenged and confronted by true believers. And they would gather that all together in the category of being persecuted. But they're not persecuted for preaching the fullness of Christ. Okay, they're preaching a different gospel about another Jesus. So to be persecuted for that doesn't equal salvation. So don't equate persecution with salvation. Don't equate persecution with being saved. Persecution is only an indicator that you're probably saved if you're preaching the fullness of Christ and if the fruits of that are seen in your life. Thanks for listening. God bless. Bye bye.